Okay, so the United States, we're going to continue with the United States in World War I. This will be part 2. If you look, I've just thrown up a few of the propaganda posters that the United States were using during the war on the home front, which we'll talk about more later this week. They're hoping, they want Uncle Sam to stamp out the Kaiser, who is the leader of the Germans, or to save a loaf of bread to help win the war, to send that over to the German, or to the Allied troops to feed them. So we need to raise an army if we're going to go to war. We're going to start with the Selective Service Act. This is a requirement for men between the ages of 21 and 30 to register to be drafted into the army. Most people did this without questioning it, although there are some people who could not join the war for religious or moral reasons or beliefs. Those would be known as conscientious objectors, people whose moral or religious beliefs prevented them from fighting in the war. So this could be anybody who, for religious reasons such as the Amish, who don't believe in fighting, could apply for conscientious objector status. If they were approved, then they didn't have to go to war. If they were denied that, then they needed to join, go sign up for the draft. If they dodged the draft, then there could be repercussions for that. African American soldiers were also kept separate from fighting units, only because the Southern whites didn't want them to be trained with weapons. They were afraid of the repercussions of them coming home. They feared that they'd pose a threat after the war. If you remember, we've talked about the Jim Crow laws in the South and how they were legally being segregated from the whites in the South to make sure that the whites were not overrun by the blacks after the Civil War. So those are conscientious objectors and African Americans. The Allies did face some setbacks throughout the war. The Bolsheviks in Russia are going to take control of the Russian government in 1917. This will start the Russian Revolution, and Russia is going to become a communist country. Means equal distribution of wealth and private property. So everybody's equal, and the government's going to control production of goods and deciding how much people get and where it all goes. Russia is going to withdraw from the war after signing a peace treaty with Germany on their own. On the side, they're going to lose some land to Germany, but other than that, Russia is going to go retreat to itself and take care of what is going on in Russia. Germany's now going to start leading some massive offenses against the Allied powers. If you look at the picture down on the left-hand side, this is Big Bertha. The Germans created her. She could be 75 miles away from the fighting zone and still fire a 1,200-pound ammunition that would hit in the trenches of the Allied power. So they didn't have to have Big Bertha anywhere close to the fighting area. They could be way off back and have no problems with that. The United States are now going to make their way to Europe. They're going to defend Paris in June of 1918. They're going to help the French keep the Germans away from Paris and from coming in and taking over that. They will also help the Germans stop at Chateau Thierry, and the U.S. forces will recapture the forest of Belleau Woods. So the United States are going to start to make an impact for the Allied powers now that Germany has been able to refocus some of their energy from a two-front war to a one-front war on the Western Front. American military women. No, they could not fight on the front lines if you were thinking that, but they could help in other ways in the military. They could sign up to be part of the U.S. Army's Signal Corps, where they would recruit French-speaking American women to serve as switchboard operators and interpreters for the United States Army. And they would also help keep communication open between the front lines and headquarters of the American Expeditionary Forces. So, women were playing a huge role over in Europe for the Americans, making sure that there was open communication between the French and the Americans so that everybody knew what was going on. In addition to, they would serve as nurses They could serve in the Navy and Marines, being typists, bookkeepers, and radio operators. So there were jobs for women, just not on the front lines. The war is going to end. By 1918, the war was crippling the German economy. Civilians were lacking food and supplies. Their soldiers were rioting. Food riots and strikes were also erupting throughout Germany by the citizens. The Central Powers soldiers are now starting to refuse to fight and even deserted the army. Central Powers began surrendering one by one. Austria-Hungary will start. Germany will be the last holdout to surrendering in World War I. The war is going to end on November 11th, 1918. That is when Germany will give up their right. The war is officially over. Germany immediately has to leave all occupied territories and surrender its aircraft, heavy artillery, tanks, and U-boats. This is just what Germany had to do initially. We will talk about it more when we talk about the Treaty of Versailles after the end of the war. We have a few other things to discuss before we can get there. So, ladies and gentlemen, there's the rest of the United States fighting in World War I. Now, what I need you to do is go back to the message board and leave one question that you had about tonight's PowerPoint lecture. Have a great evening.